The night began like so many others in the polished world of live television. Lights glaring, cameras humming, and a studio audience buzzing with anticipation. But what unfolded would quickly transcend the boundaries of a routine broadcast. It was not just a clash of opinions. It became a confrontation between legacy and resilience, entitlement and survival, dynasty and defiance. At the center of the spectacle stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Barron Trump, two figures from opposite ends of America's political spectrum and social experience. Crockett, the Texas lawmaker known for her fiery presence in congressional hearings, had become a rising name in Democratic politics. Barron Trump, son of the former president, had rarely stepped into the spotlight, but carried with him the weight of his surname, a dynasty recognizable across the globe. You're watching the latest. Make sure to subscribe and tap that like button to stay informed. The exchange began calmly. The host framed questions around political accountability, family influence, and the increasingly blurred lines between governance and celebrity. Crockett spoke in the measured cadence of a practiced attorney. Barron responded with a mix of composure and youthful confidence, offering soundbites that hinted at preparation. Then came the pivot, the moment that transformed a discussion into a headline. With a smirk and an air of certainty, Barron Trump accused Jasmine Crockett of being famous only because of scandal. The remark was short, deliberate, and piercing. The room froze. Audience members leaned forward, murmurs rippled across the crowd, and the production crew exchanged anxious glances. What happened next, however, would define the evening and ensure its place in the news. In the cutthroat theater of politics, accusations are common. Yet, to dismiss a sitting congresswoman's career as nothing more than scandal-driven was no small gesture. It was an attempt to delegitimize not just her public profile but her professional achievements. Observers noted the irony. While Crockett's rise had indeed been marked by viral clashes in committee hearings and confrontations amplified on social media, she was not devoid of legislative or legal substance. Critics argued that Barron's remark was not simply political rhetoric. It was a calculated attempt to reduce her identity to chaos and controversy. The audience reaction underscored the tension. A mix of gasps and awkward chuckles filled the air before silence settled like a heavy curtain. In that silence lay the anticipation of retaliation. Reporters on site scribbled furiously, recognizing the inevitability of a dramatic response. If political theater were a Netflix series, this was the cliffhanger right before the ad break, suspenseful enough to make you forget you were watching with borrowed Wi-Fi. Crockett's decision not to respond immediately was as calculated as the insult itself. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on her opponent, but said nothing. Analysts later described this as a tactical pause, a silence that transformed tension into spectacle. Her supporters would later claim that this restraint demonstrated composure and discipline, qualities often undervalued in an era of impulsive rebuttals. Her detractors dismissed it as theatrics. Regardless of interpretation, the pause heightened the drama. Producers backstage reportedly debated whether to cut to commercial. Instead, they let the cameras roll. For live television, silence is dangerous. But here, it became the story. The confrontation cannot be understood in isolation. Crockett had built her reputation as a civil rights attorney before entering politics. Her rise was marked by a willingness to challenge opponents directly, often in highly publicized moments. This made her a target for those eager to portray her as combative rather than substantive. Barron Trump, in contrast, had largely avoided public political engagements, yet his appearance on the program represented a new stage of visibility. His surname guaranteed media attention, and his composure suggested strategic grooming by advisors. The clash between these two figures was not just incidental. It symbolized a larger cultural divide. Outsiders carving paths through defiance versus heirs carrying inherited influence. In one corner, a congresswoman forged in courtrooms. In the other, a young man forged in golden elevators. You couldn't script a better casting call. The accusation struck a nerve, not only because of its personal nature, but also because it reflected a wider debate in American politics: the role of scandal in shaping visibility. In an era where viral moments often overshadow policy discussions, the line between fame and controversy has blurred beyond recognition. You're watching the latest. Make sure to subscribe and tap that like button to stay informed. By framing Crockett's recognition as scandal-driven, Barron Trump tapped into this narrative. Yet, critics immediately countered that his own prominence was equally the product of circumstances beyond personal achievement. This contrast amplified the charge of hypocrisy. News outlets seized on the moment. Within hours, hashtags trended nationwide: Scandal v's legacy, Crockett fires back, and Barron debate. Memes spread across platforms, many juxtaposing Crockett's steady glare with Barron's fleeting smirk. The public, ever hungry for spectacle, devoured the footage. Twitter users analyzed the clip frame by frame, as if decoding it would also reveal the recipe to Chick-fil-A sauce. For all the attention Barron's remark attracted, the greater story lay in what would follow. Crockett's reputation was not one of retreat. She had built her career on challenging those who underestimated her. Political analysts speculated that the pause, the silence, and the composure were not signs of weakness, but prelude. And so, as the cameras stayed locked on her face and the studio audience held its collective breath, one truth became clear: Jasmine Crockett was about to fire back. For viewers at home, the broadcast had already delivered its shock. But for those invested in the ongoing clash of legacy and resilience, this was only the beginning. The accusation had been made, the stage had been set, and Crockett's response was yet to come. So, before the story unfolds further, a reminder: subscribe, follow, and stay tuned. Because when a congresswoman known for her unflinching rebuttals finally breaks her silence, history tends to remember every word. The silence ended when Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her gaze steady under the glare of studio lights. The rebuttal that followed was not delivered in haste, but with the calm precision of someone who had anticipated this very attack. Observers later described her words as less a counterpunch and more a dismantling, a reframing of the insult into an indictment of legacy itself. Her message was clear. While Barron Trump attempted to reduce her influence to scandal, he himself stood on a platform built not on merit but inheritance. Crockett's response ignited the audience, sparking applause that shattered the tension. In that instant, the studio transformed from a neutral stage into an arena, and it was apparent who had seized control. What elevated the confrontation from verbal sparring to national spectacle was what followed off stage. Within hours of the broadcast, documents began to circulate online. Screenshots of alleged briefing notes, attributed to Barron Trump's advisory circle, revealed a section marked in bold, "Frame Crockett as scandal-driven." The leak suggested that the remark was not a spontaneous observation, but a rehearsed strategy. Whether authentic or not, the optics were damaging. Instead of portraying Crockett as reactive, the leaked notes portrayed Barron as scripted. Digital investigators on social media pounced. Threads dissected fonts, timestamps, and metadata, while political analysts warned that whether the notes were real mattered less than the perception they created. Crockett, for her part, did not need to comment immediately. The narrative was writing itself. Only in modern politics can a PDF leak faster than your phone battery drains at 20%. The public reaction was swift and polarized. Supporters of Crockett hailed her composure, calling the moment a defining clash between dynasty and authenticity. Detractors claimed she had capitalized on theatrics, arguing that silence and smirks should not outweigh substance. Traditional media amplified the divide. Fox News framed Crockett's comeback as a deflection from her lack of achievement, running panel discussions that criticized the celebration of viral moments. MSNBC praised her as a master of narrative control, emphasizing the gender and racial dynamics at play. You're watching the latest. Make sure to subscribe and tap that like button to stay informed. CNN offered extended coverage with multiple panels, each more crowded than the last, attempting to provide balance while leaning heavily on ratings-driven sensationalism. Meanwhile, social platforms erupted. Hashtags including Scandal v's legacy, Crockett clapback, and Erupts trended across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Viral edits replayed the footage in slow motion, overlaying dramatic music, while memes portrayed Barron's fading smirk as everything from a buffering symbol to a broken Wi-Fi signal. The story had moved beyond politics. It had become entertainment, culture, and identity all at once. As attention mounted, another twist emerged. A conservative tabloid published claims that the leaked notes were fabricated by Crockett's allies to discredit Barron Trump. Though unverified, the story injected doubt into the narrative. Did Crockett truly win on her own merit, or had her team engineered a scandal within the scandal? This uncertainty only fueled further debate. Commentators argued late into the night, trading theories about authenticity, motives, and manipulation. What became clear was that the moment had transcended fact. Perception was now the battlefield. If conspiracy theories were currency, Washington could cancel the national debt by Tuesday. Beyond the drama, serious questions began to surface. Legal scholars debated the ethics of orchestrated character attacks on sitting lawmakers by individuals not holding office. Was this an exercise of free speech or an informal political operation? The line was blurred, but the implications were significant. Political strategists evaluated the impact on upcoming elections. Crockett's ability to dominate headlines without policy discussion concerned opponents but energized her base. For Democrats, she represented defiance. For Republicans, Barron represented continuity. The clash symbolized the next generation of political rivalry. Cultural critics examined the symbolism of the exchange. A black woman, forged in courtrooms and grassroots politics, facing off against the white heir of a political dynasty. To many, the moment was about more than scandal versus legacy. It was about the competing narratives of America's identity. Inside political circles, the fallout deepened. Democratic colleagues praised Crockett publicly, though some privately worried about her overshadowing party leadership. "She's magnetic," one aide admitted, but magnets also repel. Republicans were divided. Some dismissed the event as trivial theater, while others worried about Barron's readiness for primetime appearances. His youth and inexperience were highlighted as liabilities, especially if clips of him being outmaneuvered continued to circulate. The Trump family's response was notably restrained. No immediate statements were issued. However, insiders leaked to reporters that the family was not pleased with how Barron had been cornered. The silence from Ivanka Trump in particular drew attention, fueling speculation about intra-family dynamics. Why did Jasmine Crockett respond the way she did? That question dominated the airwaves and op-ed pages long after the cameras stopped rolling. Theories proliferated, each offering a glimpse into her political instincts, her strategic foresight, and perhaps even her personal philosophy. To understand Crockett's motives, one must peel back layers: political survival, tactical ambition, and symbolic defiance. The first and most obvious explanation was defense. In politics, reputation is both shield and sword. Barron Trump's remark, famous only because of scandal, threatened to pierce Crockett's shield by reframing her career as chaos-driven rather than competence-driven. Left unchallenged, that narrative could stick. Political scientists often note that in the digital era, an accusation repeated widely enough becomes accepted truth, regardless of its accuracy. Crockett understood this better than most. By responding firmly, she closed the window before the label could spread unchecked. Her decision not to lash out emotionally, but to respond with calculated restraint, reflected a veteran's instinct. Defend the brand, but do so with elegance. You're watching the latest. Make sure to subscribe and tap that like button to stay informed. In Washington, reputations are like Wi-Fi signals, strong one minute, gone the next, and everyone pretends they know how to fix it. But Crockett's response was not purely defensive. Many analysts argued she saw an opportunity not just to protect herself, but to expand her influence. As a Congresswoman, Crockett had national visibility, but not yet national dominance. Viral clips of her clashes in committee hearings had introduced her to the broader public, but Barron Trump's attack provided her with a larger platform: primetime confrontation with the heir of America's most polarizing dynasty. By firing back in a way that captured headlines and trended on social media, Crockett transformed a potential vulnerability into a springboard. Within hours, fundraising numbers ticked upward, invitations to national panels arrived, and commentators began framing her as the breakout figure of the week. In short, Crockett turned Barron's insult into free political advertising. What began as a jab became a megaphone. A third theory, and perhaps the most resonant culturally, was symbolic. Crockett's pause, her measured gaze, her careful phrasing were interpreted as more than strategy. They were a statement. The confrontation was not simply between two individuals. It was between two archetypes: the outsider who clawed her way into power and the heir who inherited it. Crockett's rebuttal reframed the insult into a broader indictment of privilege. She shifted the story from her scandal to his legacy. This symbolic pivot elevated her beyond the exchange. It allowed her to embody something larger: the voice of those who feel dismissed by elites, underestimated by dynasties, and silenced by power structures. In that sense, Crockett's motives were not merely personal. They were cultural, even historical. If politics were high school, Crockett was the student who studied for finals. Barron was the kid whose dad built the library. Observers pointed repeatedly to Crockett's pause before speaking. In an age where politicians often rush to fill silence, her decision to wait was striking. Silence, in this context, was not absence but presence. It conveyed confidence, composure, and most importantly, preparation. Insiders speculated that Crockett anticipated an attack. Whether through intuition or leaked hints, she may have known Barron's advisors had prepped him to frame her as scandal-driven. By preparing her rebuttal in advance, she demonstrated strategic foresight. The pause gave her time to measure delivery, but it also magnified the impact. The audience leaned in. Barron grew restless. The cameras captured not panic, but poise. In modern politics, optics often matter more than content. Crockett likely understood that her reaction would be replayed in sound bites, GIFs, and TikTok edits more times than it would be read in transcripts. Thus, her motive may have been to craft a moment visually powerful enough to survive endless loops. Her body language, stillness, focus, deliberate leaning communicated authority without aggression. Analysts compared it to courtroom strategy: let the opponent overreach, then dismantle their case with surgical precision. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. In Washington, it's worth 1,000 retweets and maybe a Senate hearing. Finally, Crockett's motives may extend beyond the immediate exchange. This confrontation could serve as part of a longer arc, positioning herself for higher office, testing her resonance with national audiences, or shaping her image as a generational foil to dynastic privilege. Her refusal to lash out emotionally suggested discipline. Her ability to reframe the insult into a cultural narrative suggested vision. Both qualities indicated motives not just rooted in survival, but in ambition. So why did Jasmine Crockett respond the way she did? Perhaps it was all of the above. Defensive, to protect her reputation. Offensive, to expand her platform. Symbolic, to embody defiance against inherited privilege. Her pause before speaking, her measured words, and her composure under fire pointed to preparation, foresight, and perhaps even orchestration. What Barron Trump framed as scandal became Crockett's proof of resilience. You're watching the latest. Make sure to subscribe and tap that like button to stay informed. In the end, her motives may be best summarized, not as reaction, but as transformation, turning an insult into opportunity, a clash into spectacle, and a viral moment into a narrative of power. The climax of the confrontation came not in the initial exchange, but in Crockett's final words during the segment. Without shouting, she reframed the entire insult. That scandal may attract attention, but legacy without merit collapses under scrutiny. Observers described the delivery as surgical. Each phrase landed with precision, drawing applause from the audience and leaving Barron momentarily silent. The host attempted to transition to another topic, but the atmosphere had shifted irreversibly. The room, once balanced, now leaned in Crockett's favor. Barron's earlier smirk had vanished, his composure replaced by visible discomfort. The eruption of applause from the audience marked the definitive turning point. The segment ended, but the story had only just begun. The days following the broadcast were dominated by the confrontation. Fundraising emails from both parties referenced the exchange. Crockett's campaign reported a surge of small-dollar donations. Conservative PACs used the incident to rally supporters against what they labeled Democratic theatrics. Beyond politics, the cultural impact deepened. College classrooms dissected the clip in courses on rhetoric and media. Podcasts turned it into serialized commentary. Even late-night comedy shows, historically dominated by figures like Jimmy Kimmel, opened with monologues referencing the clash. It was no longer a moment, it was a movement, a touchstone in the ongoing battle over narrative, identity, and the theater of modern politics. When the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling, the moment did not end. In many ways, it had only just begun. The confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Barron Trump moved swiftly from studio stage to national stage, carrying with it questions of reputation, power, and legacy. Analysts agreed that Crockett's final rebuttal was the defining climax of the exchange. By turning the accusation of scandal into an indictment of inherited privilege, she not only neutralized the insult, but also reframed the debate entirely. The audience's eruption of applause provided a symbolic verdict. In that room, at least, she had prevailed. Clips of the moment replayed endlessly. On cable news, in online threads, and across TikTok edits, Crockett's steady delivery was positioned against Barron's fading composure. The optics were undeniable. What was intended as an attack became a viral victory. In politics, image is everything, and Barron's image that night looked like a software update stuck at 3%. The immediate consequences spilled beyond headlines. Politically, Crockett saw a surge in fundraising and online engagement. Her supporters framed the moment as proof she could stand against powerful dynasties without flinching. Strategically, Republicans found themselves questioning Barron's readiness for high-profile appearances. If one remark could backfire so severely, what would happen under greater pressure? Culturally, the clash fed into ongoing debates about privilege versus merit, generational divides, and the role of women of color in American politics. The room's eruption symbolized more than applause. It captured the frustration of viewers who saw the confrontation as a microcosm of American politics, inherited influence facing off against earned defiance. Experts cautioned against dismissing the moment as fleeting. In politics, viral moments often reshape trajectories. Crockett's national profile rose sharply. Think tanks invited her for panels. Advocacy groups highlighted her as a rising star. For Barron Trump, the consequences were more complex. While some supporters doubled down, framing him as unfairly targeted, others quietly questioned whether his media strategy had exposed vulnerabilities too soon. The very narrative intended to weaken Crockett had turned into one that spotlighted Barron's inexperience. It's one thing to be heir to a dynasty, it's another to inherit the family knack for unforced errors. The story also exposed the fragility of modern political discourse. In an age dominated by viral clips and hashtags, one sentence, whether rehearsed or spontaneous, can eclipse months of policy debate. What resonated was not Crockett's legislative record or Barron's potential platform, but a moment of confrontation distilled into soundbite and spectacle. Critics lamented this reality. Supporters embraced it. Either way, the exchange underscored a truth about politics in 2025. Narrative often matters more than nuance. Beyond policy and politics, the confrontation carried symbolic weight. Crockett's defiance embodied a rejection of dismissive labels often used against women and minorities in positions of power. Barron's misstep reflected the risks of relying on legacy without substance. Together, they created a tableau, a snapshot of America's struggle between inherited privilege and earned legitimacy. Cultural commentators likened it to past generational clashes, moments when younger figures underestimated opponents only to be reshaped by the encounter. Crockett, through restraint and timing, had turned an insult into a message. Never underestimate someone who's been underestimated their whole life. It usually ends with you trending for the wrong reasons. Even as Crockett's profile rose, questions lingered. Would this viral triumph translate into sustained political capital? Could Barron recover by reframing himself as a victim of media spin? Or would this moment remain a permanent marker, defining both figures in the public imagination? These questions underscored the uncertainty of American politics, where the line between entertainment and governance grows thinner by the day. You're watching the latest. Make sure to subscribe and tap that like button to stay informed. What began as a television segment ended as a national drama. Jasmine Crockett's rebuttal after Barron Trump's insult did more than electrify a studio audience. It sparked a cultural debate about power, privilege, and authenticity. The eruption in the room symbolized the eruption across the country voices, demanding not just entertainment but accountability. And yet, the story remains unfinished. In politics, there are no permanent victories, only temporary moments. Crockett may have won the night, but the legacy of this clash will unfold in the battles to come. So, as the headlines fade and the next scandal arrives, remember this: one remark can ignite a movement, and one comeback can redefine a career. Whether you see Crockett as a rising force or Barron as a wounded heir, the question persists. Who will control the narrative next time? If you've followed this far, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think scandal or legacy carries more weight in American politics? And don't forget, like, subscribe, and stay tuned. Because if one thing is certain, it's that the next eruption is never far away.